heard about the death of Baseball Hall of Famer Hank Aaron last week, a number of thoughts came to my mind. I remember watching him play. Back then, I still thought of myself as a ball player, and I admired his swing at the plate, his speed, and the grace of his play in the outfield. They were things of beauty. No one disputes the fact that he was one of the best to ever play the game. But sadly, I also remembered the overt racism that Aaron had to endure the year that he broke Babe Ruth's career home run record. Not that I need a reminder after the summer of protests that we just experienced and the horrific terrorist attacks on the Capitol on the 6th of this month. But Hank Aaron's death on January 22nd again brought to mind what I believe is, as many would agree, America's greatest evil. You see, any of us who thought that overt white racism, the racism that in 1974 for Aaron meant hate mail, death threats, real concern for his family's safety, all because he, a black man, was poised to hit more home runs than a white baseball hero from the past. Any of us who thought that that kind of blatant racism was a thing of the past in the United States can no longer take comfort in that myth. We have made progress since 1974. We elected and re-elected an African-American president. And we just watched while a woman of Jamaican and Indian descent was sworn in as vice president. Corporations and universities and other entities all over the country are carrying out diversity and inclusion initiatives. And you can't turn on the TV without seeing mixed-race couples and families advertising everything from car insurance to medication for psoriatic arthritis. But when we see men inside our Capitol taking selfies while wearing t-shirts with Nazi imagery, and others with symbols declaring that 6 million was not enough, and then see others carrying Confederate battle flags while terrorizing boldly senators and congressmen and threatening to hang the vice president of the United States, all in support of a lie perpetuated by the outgoing president. We need to ask ourselves, how did we get to such a low point in our country's history? Well, I'm here to propose to you this morning that part of the answer to that difficult question is this. We got to that point in part because Christians are unwilling, much of the time, to call white supremacy, neo-fascism, and other manifestations of racist ideology exactly what they are: evil. Now, you see, these days in the mainline church, we don't talk much about evil. Evil spirits, demons. I never preach about them. But even though the modern mind isn't very comfortable talking about it, none of us should deny for a moment the fact that there are dozens of examples of evil in the world. We need to avoid the temptation to look the other way or dance around the evil we see. gospel lesson for this morning, Mark's account of Jesus' conversation with an exorcism of an evil spirit, one that had possessed a man. Our gospel lesson is a perfect text to prompt us to think about evil and the ways we can combat it. That subject that most of us who pride ourselves in our broad-mindedness don't talk about very much. Because you see, our text is fundamentally a story about the interplay of the forces of good and evil. Jesus and his new disciples are in Capernaum. In typical fashion, Jesus, a wandering rabbi at that point in his life, attends the local synagogue and is invited by the congregation to expound the scriptures. We don't know why the people sensed that authority in Jesus' teaching. Not a word about what he said is remembered by Mark here in Capernaum. Whatever it was, though, it so astonished people that they remarked about how much authority he spoke with. But it wasn't written down for us to hear. But suddenly, Jesus' teaching is interrupted by a madman right in the middle of the service, perhaps in the middle of his sermon. We hear a voice, disruptive, disjointed, crazy, coming from a man, but really coming from the demon who possessed him. Where are the ushers? The people in the synagogue must have thought. Who let this person in? What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? The demon asks. His shouting drowning out the preacher. I know who you are, he says. You are the Holy One of God. Have you come to destroy us? You better believe I have, Jesus tells him, bluntly. And he goes on to cast out the demon. He tells it in no uncertain terms to take a walk. You see, Jesus is not the least bit wishy-washy when it comes to evil. He hates it. He destroys it wherever he can. He is unwilling to compromise when he encounters it. So naturally, that day, Jesus had no patience with demons. He cast them out. And if we jump just 2 chapters later in Mark's Gospel to where Jesus appoints the 12 disciples, we find that he expected those followers to also do the same. Casting out demons is in fact the first thing he commissioned his disciples to do. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that good and evil are always divided by a bright line and that everything in life is on one side or the other. That would make our daily choices easy, but it wouldn't be realistic. No, most of the time, living a life that reflects our discipleship is an exercise in discerning shades of gray. But racism and neo-Nazism and neo-fascism and whatever ideology that suggests that it's okay to be proud to hate, all of those parts of 21st century American life are manifestations of evil. Pure and simple. No shades of gray are involved. Jesus preached the gospel and cast out demons on a regular basis. He then commissioned his 12 disciples, and they were given 2 jobs: preach the gospel and cast out demons. So the pattern is clear. The job Jesus gave the church hasn't changed. It's the mission of our congregation, as well as the mission of all who call themselves followers of Jesus. We are to preach the gospel and cast out demons, to work for the elimination of and control of the power of evil in our midst. Now, fortunately, there are signs, hopeful signs, that many or most of our fellow Americans are clearly on the right side of this good versus evil divide. There are signs that you and I are not alone when we hold up the light in the midst of the darkness. Now, none of you who have gotten to know me over the past 2 years will be surprised when I tell you that I watched the inauguration of President Biden with great anticipation. But whether you were among those who celebrated that day and all it represented, or are among the millions of Americans who were sorry that the election turned out as it did, if you did watch the proceedings that day on January 20th, you heard, along with me, the remarkable reading of the inaugural poem, The Hill We Climb, by our 22-year-old youth poet laureate, Amanda Gorman. If you haven't heard or seen it, I'll post a video of the reading on our website. Take a few minutes and watch. It will take your breath away. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? She asks. The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. The vision that Amanda Gorman portrays in her poem is a vision of a country that is casting out its demons. It's a vision of a country that we, as followers of the one who has no tolerance for the forces of evil, can be proud to call our own. Now, tomorrow, February 1st, is the first day of this year's Black History Month. So today would be a good time for us, as members of what is often called the whitest denomination in the United States, to begin this month by celebrating light over darkness, good over evil, and committing ourselves to strive to make this time the beginning of the end of the legacy of racism that persists in every corner of our civic life. To again borrow the words of the poet, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.